the truth is that without the experiences that I had had that led to this point that I'm at now, almost a decade sober, I would not be who I am today. I would not be helping the people that I am today.
Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? You know, when we talk on Fridays and I bring guests on, I always want to highlight and maybe spotlight specifically different aspects of recovery. I feel like there are enough of two versions of the story, and those are either the train wrecks that are ongoing train wrecks, and everybody loves watching a train wreck. It's kind of I guess in some ways how you some people got to know you, but people love watching things when they're not working out. And when we go through the Lindsay Lohans and the Robert Downey Jr.'s of the 90s and early 2000s, it becomes like this media obsession, right? And then it becomes by itself this placeholder for, I'm going to put addicts in quotation marks for people listening on audio right now, but for what addiction is. That becomes the stamp. Here's addiction. And that could be people going homeless, ex-stars that are now broken, sleeping on people's couch. It doesn't matter what it is, but the nightmare. And then the other version that we always get, that I see anyway, my bias, is the ex-addict who's now in recovery and is going to meetings, and you get those like paparazzi pictures outside of 12-step meetings when they're smoking a cigarette or drinking a coffee with some friends or walking from rehab to a meeting or whatever. And that's like, oh, they're good now. So those are the two versions of recovery that I think most people hear and get. I want to show all the other shit, because the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is a relatively small number of people actually fit in those two camps. And a lot of other people are in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think your story is an interesting version of that. And so why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and kind of take them a little bit through it can be the addiction part itself, but I mean, for me, it's more like when the train came off the tracks.
Yeah. So I talk a lot about meeting people where they're at, and that, you know, you're right. America loves the crashing and the burning, and they love a comeback story. And so I think the reason why my story is still such a relevant part of pop culture history is because it's the comeback story now. But what I say to people all the time is that the Alexis, who was a 19-year-old heroin addict on national television fighting a couple of criminal charges, was just as worthy of love and respect and care as the Alexis that you see before you today, who's 9 years sober, owns a treatment center, has a successful recovery podcast, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we really need to take a look at that. I mean, I often see that, I often take note that we live in a very like puritanical society, like you're bad or you're good, and there's no spectrum, which leaves out the vast majority of the population who are traumatized children walking around in adult bodies. So a brief background of my story is I grew up in Southern California. My mom was an ex-model, and my dad was a very, very, very well-known director of photography. He worked on Friends and The Nanny and all of the 90s sitcoms, but he was a manic alcoholic. And so my mom was this like Buddhist, free-loving, pot-smoking hippie with years and years of undealt with trauma. And she used her spirituality as like a Band-Aid to mask all of her pain that she was not ready to deal with.
The idea of like spiritual bypass, right? Of
yes.
Just sitting and meditating, even though you think your life sucks. Well, at least I'm meditating.
Yeah, at least I'm meditating. And, you know, we would do sound baths and had huge crystals and life-size Buddhas in our house. And back then that was seen as very bizarre. Like, we grew up in suburban Los Angeles. And so we were the house that always smelled like sage, and none of the kids were allowed to go over there because we were crazy. But what ended up transpiring is my dad, of course, had an affair. He's been married 5 or 6 times. My mom was devastated. And there was incest going on in the home. So my sexual abuse probably started around 4, but the first memory I have of being raped was when I was 5. And that went on for several years at the hands of a family member who was 10 years older than I was. So he was 15 to 17 or 14 to 17. And I was 4 to 7. And I didn't tell anybody about that until after I got sober, or as I was trying to get sober. And so from a very early age, I needed to check out of my reality. My existence at home was really painful. My dad was physically violent only towards me. My other sisters got away unscathed. And I had a mom who just was not capable of acknowledging my needs. So I was called and deemed a hypochondriac and a bad child and a rebel and a rule breaker and always causing trouble. And all those things were really just me being a traumatized child calling out for help.
Yeah.
And so by the time I was 16, I was no longer able to attend school. I was already addicted to Oxycontin. My addiction really started very young, but with substances around the age of 12 to 14. And then I became physically dependent on opiates sometime around before my 16th birthday. And thankfully I got my high school degree, and I did what my mom told me to do, which was, you're young and pretty and skinny, go be a model. So I started working in the entertainment industry, and as a young drug addict, I, of course, got involved with a lot of really sketchy people in dangerous situations. And I was raped again when I was 17 by someone in Hollywood who was really, really powerful. And I never reported it because he had been charged with rape before and ruined the girl's life and got off. And so what ended up happening was I was working in LA. My sister was dating Kid Rock. We're partying, and we get seen by this producer who's like, you guys are a trip. You guys do yoga and you meditate and sound baths and you're drenched in crystals. I mean, we looked like Topanga. And for people who don't know what Topanga is, but hippie, Amazon model hippie Topanga chicks, before that was cool. That wasn't a thing back then. And so he pitched this alternative Kardashian family to E, and they picked it right up. So I signed my contract with E for my own reality show, which I manifested down to the very dollar amount that I received in June of 2009. And in July 2009, I was hanging out with a friend one night that I just met a few months prior. And he took me to this house and proceeded to rob the house while I was in a blackout. I came to, at this point, I was using alcohol, Xanax, and Oxycontin or heroin, whatever I could get my hands on. And I was thrown a duffel bag. I started stuffing the duffel bag full of shit, and we ran down the hill. Turns out that was Orlando Bloom's house. And my friend had been robbing celebrities since well before I had even met him. And so I stopped talking to him after that night. And a couple of months later, some surveillance footage of him at Lindsay Lohan's house came out, and he looks into the camera, and I was like, holy cow, that's Nick. And so I called the police and didn't hear anything back. And so on the second day of filming my reality show, we'd been out the night before with a bunch of rock stars doing heroin, filming the show. I came home at 4:35 a.m., took a Xanax bar, figured I'd get a couple hours of sleep, and then we'd wake up and record again. It's the hamster wheel of addiction. You know what I mean? It's just like nonstop partying.
Well, but even fueled by, you found this way to make that a sustainable model by finding people who said, yeah, we'll shoot that and put it up somewhere. That'll be great. People will love this.
It worked. It worked. I was still very much so at the point in my addiction. And mind you, at that point, I'm 18 years old. So it's still very much so at the point where it's just fun with like occasional problems, you know, like I wouldn't show up to set, or I would be, you know, out too late and be hungover the next morning or whatever. Like the consequence for my behavior was very minimal. Aside from that burglary experience, I'd never been in trouble in my life, and I had a good consciousness. Like I knew like right from wrong. That's not to say that I was some Mother Teresa, because I certainly was not. But yeah, I was at this point. This is the point where it got really bad, and it ended up saving my life and being the best thing that ever happened to me. On the second day of filming, took that Xanax, going to bed, and an hour later, the cops knocked down my door. And I thought they were there to talk to me because I had called them about Nick, but no, they were there to arrest me. So what proceeded was me fighting a burglary charge of Orlando Bloom's house on national television as a 19-year-old heroin addict. And nobody knew that I was addicted to drugs back then. They just thought I was some young, free-spirited hippie, you know, chick that was like smoking pot and probably drinking a little bit too much, but nobody knew the messiness of my existence. And so I did. I fought the case on national television, dealing with all of the public scrutiny and shame. And
this is that piece we were talking about earlier, where people love watching the train wreck.
Meltdown, the train wreck. And then I ended up taking a plea deal because I could not testify. I mean, my heroin addiction just got so bad. As the shame increased and the public scrutiny increased, like the addiction just skyrocketed, and now I had the funds. And I was blowing between my sister and I about $10,000 a week on heroin and partying and that lifestyle, and I just couldn't do it anymore. So in a weird way, it was like I just kind of wanted to go to jail. Like
you need like a stop sign.
I needed a break. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I have a SWAT team arrest in my story, and I was making money from drugs because I was selling them, but the same idea of kind of my entire world. I mean, I guess you were making money from drugs too. You just had to use them for it because the show depended on you being fucked up. It doesn't work as well if you're like waking up in the morning going, well, today we're going to go to the gym.
Yeah, there's nothing
and go
exciting
shopping
about
for
that.
some healthy food. Nobody watches that. People watch the destruction. So in an interesting way, you found through Hollywood, through entertainment, a way to support the habit by finding a group of people that knew they could monetize it somehow. And so, you know, I was making the money directly from the drugs. You were making the money from the behavior that resulted from the drug use. And in the same way, I got in a motorcycle accident, broke my leg, had drugs on me. Cops found the drugs on me. They came, busted me at home with a bunch more, which led to, you know, looking at years and years in prison. So I have a couple of questions because I wrote these things down. And the two things that really stuck out for me from the story is the idea that the early struggling Alexis deserved of love at least as much as the new Alexis, the current version. And the thing that came up in my head to some extent is maybe absolutely as deserving of love, but needed love maybe more back then, right? Like
needed external love, absolutely.
Because there was not that much internal love.
No, and the truth is, until I met my husband, we've been married for 8 years, I had never known what unconditional love actually was. I'd never experienced unconditional love. So unconditional love always had conditions. If you do this sexual favor for me, I will love you. If you behave well and don't throw tantrums, I will love you. If you're, you know what I mean? Like, then I will love you. Like, love was always conditional. Like, you didn't get snuggles or hugs or whatever unless you were being well behaved. And so, I just think that it's a really interesting. So when I got sober, that was not, when I went to jail, I could clearly see here that heroin was a problem for me, but I wasn't ready to get sober because I didn't have any tools. No one in my family had ever gotten sober before. No one had walked this path. So I got out, violated my probation, was facing 6 years in prison, and ended up getting sentenced to a year in treatment. And when I went in, I decided that I was going to leave the public eye for good, because I had seen the Britneys and the Lindsays who had gone to promises in and out, in and out, in and out. And I knew that for me, if I went out, I would die. Like, it was that bad. My behavior.
What made you know that? Like, what allowed you to have that insight?
I think I just kind of realized, one, that if I fucked up, I was going to go to prison for 6 years. If I went to prison for 6 years,
like that was the thing.
My entire heart would be, I would never recover. And that's what I said to the judge. I said, if you give me this, I said, you can send me to 6 years in prison. You have every right to do that. Because I did violate my probation. But I said, if you do that, my heart will come out harder than it even is now. And I don't know how that's possible, but I just know I won't survive. And I said, I'm addicted to heroin and I need help. And thankfully he sentenced me to treatment. But, with heroin, it's just one of those things where, like, I had overdosed at that point. Like, my sister had overdosed in my arms. Like, I knew that I would be turning to prostitution within a couple of years. I knew that I had already been held at gunpoint multiple times. I already knew that the environment that I was in was really risky. And so I went away and I did the work, and I'd love to dive into what that looked like in a second. But to get back to your question, I made a conscious choice to come back to this space because I felt like people needed to hear my story, especially with what's going on in the world. And when I did, all of a sudden everything kind of blew up within a very short period of time, because everybody wanted to know, like, what had happened to me. And I really stayed away from the media. And it's interesting, the comments and the messages that I get from people like, you're my hero and I got sober because of you and you've helped it. And that's all great, and even when I'm written about in Touch Weekly or whatever it might be about the podcast or guests I've had on or whatever it is, just the framework and the way that people describe the, in quotes, old Alexis versus the Alexis that you're sitting down in front of today. And so the truth is that without the experiences that I had that led to this point that I'm at now, almost a decade sober, I would not be who I am today. I would not be helping the people that I am today. So I have a really hard time, when people deem one version of myself as more worthy than the other.
Yeah, and
that's
why
I think it's a question we need to have.
When I heard the deserving of love, I mean, I think, look, at its core, we're all deserving of love. So that's a wonderful statement and a very and a beautiful way to look at the world. What I'm also hearing is that version of you at 16, 14, 18, pick an age before this arrest, and probably for a while after it, if your story is anything like mine. There was a huge absence of it. So you were equally deserving, but the absence externally and internally was there. So yes, people had conditions on it, but like inside, you felt like a piece of shit, which is, I think, the place a lot of us find ourselves in, is feeling like a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And we sometimes need an intervention from the outside. And I don't mean that in the classic like show intervention. We need a push. We need something from the outside to happen to allow us to have a very clear choice. You know, I studied neuroscience when I got my PhD after all my stuff, studying addiction, just trying to figure out what the fuck happened. Like, I really went back to school to go like, what the fuck happened? You know, my dad was a physician, my mom, human resource manager in a bank. Like, me ending up as a meth, coke, ecstasy, blah, blah, blah dealer in LA was not in the cards. It wasn't, nobody had written that shit out. And I wanted to understand what happened. And one of the things that really resonated for me a lot is how for so many people, that's why I wear this bracelet that says fuck shame on it. And one of the reasons for that is it doesn't matter where you came from, the inner feelings of worthlessness, lack of hope, deep, deep shame about who you are at the core, right? Now we can sit here and understand that we have value as people. But if your story is anything like mine, back then, I don't know that I would have exactly gambled a lot of money on my value as a human being.
Yeah. And I mean, even into years and years into my sobriety. So for me, I carried, up until a couple of years ago as a twice convicted felon. Every time I'd get pulled over, for like my taillight being out, I would be yanked out of the car and have the whole car searched. And I felt like I carried this scarlet letter. And I remember several years ago, we bought our house in a very like Stepford-like community. It's a planned community tucked up into a mountain, very few homes. And it's a community. We literally moved up here for that tight-knit community. But when we moved in here, I found myself really isolating and being afraid. And when the moms from my daughter's school would invite me over and they'd all start drinking, I wouldn't want to tell them my story. And I wouldn't want to tell them because I knew that they would find out that I was the bling ring girl and had my own reality show and was messy. And, problematic or whatever, like fucked up, version that they would have of me would be. And what I found was I slipped into like a really serious depression. And, these moments, you had talked about the moments where you're literally backed into a corner and you're like, there's no way out. I have had countless of those memories where I've hit a wall in my sobriety and I've been backed up into a corner because I needed to break through to the other side. And this is when I really stepped into who I am as a person and completely set myself free. And it's when I claimed my story, all of it, the messy, challenging, ugly, dirty, mean, vicious parts of it and the beautiful, glorious, stunning parts of it too. Like I was living in this world where I was like, well, I'm sober now. And like, everything's good. Like I've got my shit together and look at me now. And I'm buying this house and, I own a drug and alcohol treatment center and I have my degree in counseling and you know what I mean? But I didn't want to look at the parts of me that were dark, that shadow work that made me into this person. I didn't want to acknowledge her anymore.
All right. So I hear so much I want to touch on right there. Because, and I have a feeling, I mean, I know Alo House, like circumstantially. I used to own a rehab myself. And And so I knew the team there a little bit, but my views on recovery typically clash with a lot of traditional people's recovery views anyway. And I thought today would be a really cool, fun conversation. And the reason is, again, I like presenting variable recovery stories. And the fact of the matter is, as I see it, is with millions of people who struggle with addiction, people are going to be finding completely different paths. And the more of these stories we tell, the more of these conversations we have, the bigger the odds that somebody's going to listen and go, oh my God, I've never related to everything else I heard. This version of things seems to me like something I can hold on to. And so, again, another thing you said is when you got arrested or right around that time, drugs were still fun with every once in a while periodic problems, right?
Yeah.
You were 19.
I was 18.
18.
Then.
Okay.
Yeah. I went to jail like 4 days after my 19th birthday.
All right. That's a good birthday gift.
Yeah.
I was almost 25. I was almost 26. But here's the thing. I tell my people all the time, because my view on addiction is pretty different than traditional recovery. And I say to people, look, you can beat addiction forever. You can do it. The only thing you have to do is become a person who's not addicted. And everything you just said is that over this time, over the last decade, you've become a different person by addressing some of the stuff that was going on, by really digging in deeply. You know, my book is called The Abstinence Myth. And people think that, and that's why I called it this, is because I knew people would freak out at the title. But people think that what I mean is that people shouldn't abstain. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that abstinence is not the thing that fixes you. And in my opinion, one of the things that we have to stop measuring recovery by is days abstinent.
It's time. I agree. I think we're on the same page. So when we created Alo House, our slogan is connection, not control. We meet people where they're at. And again, going back to the whole view on this puritanical society, it was Christian white men in AA who made such a huge emphasis on like time, right? And while yes, like we should celebrate like 10 years of not getting loaded and not checking out of my reality is a huge thing, or nearly 10 years, is a huge fucking accomplishment. Like, hell yeah, we should celebrate that. And I only really ever talk about my time because I want people to know that it is possible.
Sure.
But I think that we're doing a disservice to so many people when we heavily focus on the amount of time that they have. And so going back to what you were saying about do we fully recover? I do believe that we fully recover. So I'm so lucky that I got sober when I did, because my brain wasn't even done developing yet. I got sober at 19. So I had another good almost 8 years of clean time to let my brain like reset and to program my neural pathways and to access that prefrontal cortex and to be able to do that work. Now, a perfect example of this is I've had multiple surgeries and a life-threatening incident. I had a blood clot in my right lung after I delivered my second daughter.
Oof.
I've had to be on pain pills several times in my recovery, and not once did I go, how do I go and get heroin?
Yes.
Now, and that's not to say that I think that I'm invincible.
No.
I believe that if we're not living in the work, and the work can look different for everybody. So I no longer participate in 12-step meetings, although Alcoholics Anonymous did save my life in the beginning, and it was because of the community.
Yeah.
I needed that community to keep me going, to believe that this thing was possible. And it served me for a long time. And those 12 steps are amazing. But for me, it's like deep trauma therapy work and spiritual healing and meditative practice, journaling, community. All of these things are things.
Service.
So the Recovering from Reality, which is the name of my book and podcast, literally was... it's about checking into life. Like, I knew that I was okay going forward when I stopped spending every single day trying to check out of my reality, but
Yeah.
instead trying to check into my reality. When life became so worth living, even in the hardest moments.
Love
Right
it.
now, if you looked at my external reality, my world is falling apart. We're in the midst of isolation. My children are freaking out. My business is suffering. Staff have coronavirus. Patients are leaving. Chaos. Okay. And in 2018, when the fires happened, all 5 of our treatment center houses burned down. I blew through all of my savings. So I live paycheck to paycheck right now. So if you looked at my external reality, you'd go, holy shit.
Yeah.
How are you this calm right now? It's because of my practice.
Yeah.
I live in a state where my autonomic nervous system, my central nervous system is calm. And sure, does it get elevated? Yes. But I know how to calm myself back down.
Yeah.
And those are the tools. And so if you were to say, well, then couldn't you just go drink? Probably. But I enjoy my reality so much, even in the chaos of this, because I know that I've been divinely taken care of, always have been, always will be, that it will be okay. And that it's so much better to be here than to check out of my reality with that 1 or 2 glasses of wine at the end of the night every night, or that toke of weed or whatever it might be. It's just not for me. Now,
and I think that's the important message. So there's so much in that I just want to unpack real quick. Your recovery journey can change, first of all, for everybody listening. Just because something is working for you right now, if you get stuck or if you feel like hey, AA's worked for me for 4 years, but I'm feeling lacking right now. What the fuck is wrong with me? There might be nothing wrong with you. You may have literally outgrown.
It's time to level up.
Piece of the puzzle, and that's okay. And it's a message we don't get that much, right? So I talk to people all the time. Like, there are people in my program that are in 12-step meetings, and because I have an online program, they're in 12-step meetings and go to my online program. And I don't preach powerlessness. I preach empowerment.
And there you go.
Once you understand the balance, they figure out, and AA even tells you, keep what you want and throw away the rest. Like, the program allows you to adapt. It's just that sometimes there are people within it who are incredibly dogmatic and don't believe that you should be able to adjust things.
Not to mention the fact that Bill Wilson used psychedelics in order to get sober, and then several years later into his sobriety began using acid on a regular basis. So we're able to expand, and we're able to identify what works for us. I have many friends who are still in the program who are currently using plant medicine to heal their deep-rooted sexual trauma. Do we now deem them as not sober? No, because their intention is not to check out of their reality and escape with plant medicine. It's to check into their realities deeper, to explore their pain, to explore their shadow selves, and to heal.
Yeah. So it's really cool to hear this from you as we're talking. I'd love to connect more offline later when we're done with this, about continuing to bring this sort of message of recovery and elevating it, because I'll take us back to the beginning of what we were talking about. The stories are pretty consistent. The movies, the TV coverage, the magazine coverage is pretty consistently about the 2 kind of stereotypical addicts in recovery. And that's always traditional recovery as far as I've seen it, or addicts who are train wrecks. And kind of like, those are the stories we get. And the problem is that because there's so much shame for everybody in addiction, they believe that. And again, I'm putting addict in quote, they believe those stories. And then they only have those 2 realities to compare their reality to. And if you can only be a piece of shit failure or an oh my God kind of success hero, look, most of us fall short of oh my God hero most of the time. And we have to tell the intermediate stories. We have to tell the more complete picture of reality so that more and more people can say, oh, wait, you know what? I used to drink the blackout 7 days a week, and now I managed to cut my drinking by 80%, and I'm doing so much work. I'm on the right path, not I haven't completely stopped drinking, therefore I'm a failure.
Well, and this was a conversation I just recently had with my husband. I get asked a lot because of my history with addiction about Suboxone maintenance and medical assisted treatment. And my view over the years has certainly shifted, but Evan, my husband, was the one who really created this profound thing. He goes, if Suboxone, even on the highest dose of Suboxone, could buy you time to do the work, don't you think it's worth it?
Sure. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. And is that person not sober?
Plus,
no. Like,
but
who
even that, like, who the fuck, who cares?
Who
gives
cares?
Like, who gives a fuck
Exactly.
about
Like,
the judgment?
who puts the who gets to be the end all be all deciding factor? So was Bill Wilson, did he not die on his deathbed sober because he started using
and my thing is, again, like,
acid? Who knows?
Yeah. And plus,
and who cares?
let's make the judgment different. Like, are you on the path? Like, are you on a path to making your life better? If you're on a fucking path to make your life better, here's some wheels.
Amen.
Here's some water. What do you need? A towel? What the fuck do you need? Just keep doing the work. Put one foot in front of the other. It's not my place. And this is like, so for instance, Ignited, when I created it, was specifically created to offer alternative options. My story started in AA. I was sober in AA for 3 years before I left. But just because that worked for me doesn't mean it has to work for anybody else. So for me, it's not about, hey, here's what worked for me, follow my path. It's about, hey, here are all these different things that have been shown to be effective to people. Now let's create your version of it. I don't care if that means AA meetings and yoga, smart recovery and mountain climbing, or, marathon running. Like, I don't really care what the combo is for you. I just feel like my job, my calling in the world is to open more people up to the possibility that they too can be happy, content again in life, no matter who believes that the choices they've made are the correct recovery choices.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree 100%.
So cool. So cool. So tell us a little bit more. So a huge trajectory. It's funny. I don't often meet people who've had that similar a trajectory to mine. So that's cool. What, you've got a podcast, book, like what else, what are you doing now in service? And how can people connect with your work?
Yeah. So, there's been so many different modalities that have really served me. And on the path of those healings, I'm the type of person that feels like they need to become an expert in everything. So when I was in rehab, I went to school to become a drug and alcohol counselor. Like, I need to know everything about everything. If I'm going to do Reiki, I need to become a Reiki master. You know what I mean? I need to be a birth doula. I need to do all of these things just because I have such a mind for information. Like, I love learning.
Yeah.
But right now, what it looks like is, I got back on social media, really consistently. So we have the treatment center, Alo House, which is a non-12-step holistic treatment center. And then I have the podcast, Recovering from Reality. I have the book, Recovering from Reality. And then I just launched an incredible online course called the Life Reset course, How to Recover from Your Reality. And it's basically a collection of tools that I've found to be the most successful in healing deep-rooted trauma and getting out of your own way. So for me, where I realized I was really stagnant was as a result of my subconscious belief systems. And so we go through Maslow's hierarchy of needs and address which need was not met, and then the corresponding belief system. And then we dive into ways to heal that. And we're journaling, and we're doing emotional freedom technique tapping, and we're really doing this kind of psychosomatic, like deep work that I think is really like so helpful for so many people. I mean, you don't have to be an addict, but maybe you're continuously finding yourself in the same relationship over and over again. Well, I bet you there's a core belief there, a subconscious belief system that, that you're not really worthy of a healthy relationship or love or whatever it might be. So I'm doing all of these different things. And I really love it. And it's been an honor to like serve so many people. And I know you know what that's like, just to be, I built all of this with the intention of growing a community of people who wanted to up-level their lives. I don't care if you want to get sober or not. Consciously, we're being called to, I believe, level up. And I believe that, everyone wants to heal the planet, right? But it starts with us individually, and it creates a ripple effect. So from me getting, leveling up in my life, I've been able to affect thousands of people, and you can too. Mm-hmm. So I just want to encourage people to do that, and that, when you're ready to do the work, there's so many people out there. Like you said, there's many different ways and so many people giving different options on how to get sober. And it was interesting. I had a guest that came on and goes like, as healers, we're all pretty much saying the same thing. Sometimes you just need to hear it from a different, person or point of view. And all of a sudden it clicks. So I don't care if it clicks, if you're doing Smart Recovery or your program or Alo's program or my program or Brene Brown's program or Dr. Gabor Mate's program or anybody else that all of my different teachers, as long as you're finding the path towards the work and experiencing that freedom, because I do believe that everybody deserves that.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That's so true. And thank you for jumping on here and talking. I'm always happy, impressed, and inspired when I find other people who are kind of on this path of just helping people find whatever works for them. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And of course, congratulations, not just on the time, but on the things that you've been able to accomplish and the way you've been able to turn your life around. It's awesome.
Thank you.
And for those of you who are listening right now, we're going to have all the links for all of Alexis's stuff. Check her out, check out the podcast, obviously. And whatever resonated for you, take a screenshot right now, tag both of us. It's Alexis Haines right? Is that your?
It's Alexis Haines.
Alexis Haines is the handle. Tag her, tag us, tag Ignited, and let us know what resonated, because we always love hearing back from you guys. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. See you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful, and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.